We're working on exercise 7 in chapter 5. I'm going to begin by reading the problem description. It says create a class that holds data about a job applicant. So this is going to be a class file that's going to be separate from the executable program. Include a name, a phone number, and 4 Boolean fields that represent whether the applicant is skilled in each of the following areas: word processing, spreadsheets, database, and graphics. Include a constructor that accepts values for each of the fields. Also include a get method for each field. Notice it does not say set, but you know the way I see it, you may as well make setters too. Just FYI. Create an application, this will be the separate file, that instantiates several job applicant objects and passes each in turn to a Boolean method that determines whether each applicant is qualified for an interview. Then in the main method, display an appropriate method for each applicant. A qualified applicant has at least 3 of the 4 skills. Okay, so I think the easy part, obviously, is to start with the job applicant class. That's what we're going to create. So we're going to have fields for a name, a phone number, and 4 Boolean fields for the skills. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, jump into Eclipse here. I'm going to close my open tabs. I'm still working in my Chapter 5 project folder. So I'm just going to right-click the source folder and create a new class file. They want us to call it job applicants. This is just going to be a class, so it's going to be a blueprint, basically. We don't need a main method there, so I'm going to go ahead and create that. So they told us that they want to have data fields. All right, so I added 2 private string variables, one for name and one for phone. Why should a phone be a string? And it could be a number, right? We're not doing math with it. Plus, you also, if you make it a string, you make the provisions for if the person puts in dashes or parentheses or spaces, basically. So, all right. Then they said they want Boolean fields for word processing, spreadsheet, database, and graphics, was it? All right, so I'm going to add those in as well. And of course, with the copy paste, it's not always so clean, so I'm cleaning it up. So 4 Booleans. They did ask us to set, or I'm going to choose my words carefully here, create gets for each one of them, right? They didn't say anything about sets, just gets. So I'm just going to do that. Right click, I'm going to go to the source, generate getters and setters. I want to select all of these. Or do I just want to do this? I can do that. Or I can do setters too. But they did very explicitly say get. So I'm just going to select that. So all the gets have now been set. Not to confuse terminology. No, all I simply did, Tom, is I right-clicked up here on top of the data fields, and then source, generate getters and setters. You can type these in manually too, and it's not actually a bad practice because I think one advantage to doing it manually is that it forces you to understand. But I'm also doing this for time efficiency. And plus, when you get what it does and you're out in the work world doing it, you're going to be doing that all the time. It's just easier, quicker, and more efficient, and frankly, less error prone. Okay, back to the instructions. All right, include a constructor that accepts values for each of the fields. Okay, so if I'm going to create a constructor, I'm going to put it right here below the data fields and above all the getters. And I'm just going to say public, because it needs to be accessible. And then I'm going to use job applicant, same name as the class. And then just list each one of these. String for name. String for phone. Here's where I'm going to abbreviate. Word processing. Spreadsheet. Oops. Database. And graphics. Some curly brackets. And then we're going to start setting those values. And here's what I'm going to do. I mean, this is pretty easy stuff at this point. Name equals name. If you want to really follow, I think, what is a better convention, I would recommend putting this in front of it because it refers back to itself. I'll do the same for phone. And then we have these four. So I'm just going to be efficient here. Database. And a semicolon to close it off. Now, would you guys agree that we have accomplished all the goals that they set out for us in this class file? We have. We've created the class, included the data fields that they wanted. We created getters for all of them, and a constructor which sets each of the values. If you're wondering why we didn't do setters, we're going to allow the constructor to do that work for us. That's going to set the values. And then we're not going to want to come back and change those values and think about the logical reason why. If you get the information from a job applicant, you type it in on a form, and then you press enter and send it off, right? You're not going to say later that, oh no, I'm going to reset his word processing. I guess he can. No, because you've already set it. But at the time you fill out the form, you know, now you're starting to come up with reasons. All right, let's save our work. Next part of the problem. Create an application that instantiates several job applicant objects and pass each in turn to a Boolean method that determines whether each applicant is qualified for an interview. All right, so we already know what it's going to be called. So let's just go ahead and copy that name. And actually, I've learned this the hard way. Don't copy and paste from here. I'll just type it. You guys remember what happens when it puts all the copyright citation information in there? All right, new class file, folks. Test job applicants. This one will include a main method, and I will say finish. Let's get rid of that auto-generated stuff. Now it said we need to instantiate several applicants. Now I just so very handily have some code already typed out that does that. for sake of time efficiency. So you can do something. I'm copy pasting, Tom. That's just what was in there. All right, you want me to change some of these to Wisconsin? Give me another Wisconsin area code. Yeah. 608 is Dane County. 715 is up north there, hey. 920 is Fox Valley area. All right. So we're in turn passing name, phone number, word processing true, spreadsheet false, database true, whatever the last one was, graphics false. So I'm just calling them app 1, app 2, app 3, app 4. Yes, that could all be on one line, but obviously I don't have enough space probably to fit it on there. I mean, I can try. Here, maybe it'd be a little easier for you guys to see. Better off leaving it like that. Yeah, we're just putting together information so we have something to work with. All right. The other thing that might be handy is to have some pre-generated messages ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I have 2 string variables that I've created that I'm just about to paste in. And I have basically messages. So I'm going to have one string saying qualified message. So whoever is qualified for an interview or not qualified message is not qualified for an interview at this time. Remember the stipulation in the problem description. Yeah. Instantiate several job applicant objects, we've done that, and pass each in turn to a Boolean method that determines whether each applicant is qualified for an interview. So to me, that sounds like I need to create a method. So I'm going to begin by doing that. So I'm going to move down the screen here a little bit and get outside the main method. And I'm going to create one that's called isQualified. Now, why is it underlining? Yeah, we're going to put a return statement in there. So I'm going to create a couple of variables inside here. One is it wants us to return a Boolean value. So I'm actually going to create a Boolean variable here that I'm going to call isQual, so isQualified, true or false. And at the very end of this method, I am going to return that. So I'm going to say return isQual, knowing it's isQualified. The other thing that we need to do is we need to keep a count. How many of the skills does this person need to have? How many? 3 out of the 4. Okay. So we're going to have to basically check each capability and then keep count. So if we're going to keep count, I strongly suggest we have a counter set up. So let's create an integer. Let's call it count. Let's preset it to 0 because we don't want to pre-qualify them without doing anything. All right. And here, now we have to do some decisions, right? Watch how I'm going to approach this. Keep in mind that what we're going to be passing in from wherever we call this, we're going to be passing in the whole job applicant. So the whole thing as an object with all the values that we preset are coming in. So we're going to be reading those qualifications out of that object. So one thing I'm going to do is I'll say something like this. I'll say if that job applicant, whoever it is, and we're going to get, wait, wouldn't it normally auto-populate this? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, that is an important thing to know. So when something is a Boolean value, being a true or false, there's a little prefix that gets slapped on there. So this is an important thing to know. The getters will be set to is. And Tom, how did you discover that? But did you just knew that? Yeah, like you were writing the code and you used the tools that were built in. So if I typed in has oh yeah, the assumed one is get. Yeah. So when it's a Boolean value, notice how there's no get in front of it. It changes it to is. So that's just something that you want to be mindful of, especially if you're using the automatic tool. If you hand coded the getters manually, you would use get. But because we did it automatically, now we're learning that Eclipse automatically switches that word to is because it's Boolean. It's either true or false. So is a logical prefix. Is has word skills, All right, so that's just something that you might not know. So it's handy that it's pointed out. So, and I probably has word skill, singular. Yeah, singular. And then we need to put our parens after it. So if that's the case, we're going to add to our count. So we're just going to say count what? Yeah, you could do plus equals 1 or plus plus. That works too. And then what's going to happen is we're going to do this for each one of the Boolean skills. So I'm just, at this point, I'm going to copy them in because it is a repetitive process. And I'll clean up my formatting so you guys don't yell at me. Not really necessary. So I did count plus plus here. Oh, how about I do every format? So basically these statements are all equivalent. Plus plus, plus equals 1, or count plus 1. Those all work the same. Then, of course, we need to do a check to see what our count is. So we might do something like if count is what? There you go, greater than or equal to 3. Then what are we doing? Is qualified would equal. If the count is greater than or equal to 3, then is qualified would be true. Otherwise, it will be false. And then we just return that value. Okay, so now we've created the method that will check to see if the person's qualified and return a true or false. But we still need to display the message, right? So there's a strategy you can use, and what I'm trying to do here, keeping in mind that I've already got a qualified and a not qualified message set as variables, I think that it's going to make a lot of sense to me to create another method for display. So this is what I created. So I just created a separate method whose only job is to do a system out, and that way we can reuse it. We're going to pass in the job applicant and all its values, and we are going to pass in the message, is qualified or is not qualified. But we still need some logic here. Do you guys need me to leave that on the screen for a second? Okay, so now we're going to do a series of very simple if-else statements, one for each job applicant. So this is, once we have the first one, all the other ones will just follow suit. So I'm going to say if, and what am I checking to see? If the person is qualified. Yeah. And what I'm doing now is I'm calling this Boolean method. Now, this is kind of interesting because you remember, whenever you're calling upon a method that returns something, you have to have somewhere for it to go, right? And if I was writing something that was an integer return, I'd have to have like a variable of an integer that would grab that returned value. In this case, I'm going to run the method as part of the if statement declaration. So what it's returning is true or false to trigger the if to work. So it's not going into a variable, but it is triggering a true-false in an if statement. So that's kind of an approach maybe you haven't seen yet in all your programming classes. I don't know. So in this case, I'm going to send applicant 1 in. And if the person is qualified, I'm going to call upon my display method, which I just called display, and I'm going to just say display. What am I displaying? The applicant and the message I want to send in. It's either qualified or not qualified. And in this case, we're not going to be sending the not qualified message, because if the person is qualified, we're going to send the qualified message, period. And if that's not the case, we're going to display again, but we're going to display the not qualified message. That's for the first applicant. How many applicants did I make? 4. And if we had learned about loops, I would loop this. But since we formally haven't learned about it in this class yet, I think that's next chapter, I'm going to just come in here and manually change all these and make sure that I'm being consistent. And I know it's a little frustrating if you already understand the concept of looping and you see a spot where looping should be used and we're not using it, but that will change. And believe it or not, folks, this is a completed program, provided it runs. So we're not going to be prompted for any input or output. It's just going to do it. So we need to look at what we're throwing in, and you tell me which applicants are going to be qualified and which ones are not, just from what we preset with the constructor. First one qualified, false, right? Second one qualified, false. Third one qualified, true. Fourth, true. All right, so we're anticipating the output, and that's important to do as well. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and then I'll give you a chance to see the code in its entirety. So let's go ahead and hit the play button. Johnson not qualified. Kermit not qualified. Lawrence is qualified. Mitchell is qualified. Can we say it's working? All right, we have a successful program. So let's review the code. Top part of the code. Pause your video. Next section of code. And the final section of code. All right, folks, that ends this video.